I'm Jordan Valdina. I'm a registered architect and a professional engineer. Designing spaces and connecting people to places they love is what I do. Using the material in this program, my hope is that I may inspire and provide value to you in your journey through our built environment. This is the Architecture Show. Welcome again to another episode of the Architecture Show. Let's talk about the basics of architecture. Again, I have to qualify and re-qualify that this is just a brief discussion. By no means complete, thorough, perfectly in sequence. It's just off the top, conversational. And yet there's something of value to that because sort of what remains, what's natural, what's really important sort of shows up through it, or can. It runs a risk of doing it if you've been doing this stuff enough. So, cold morning out. One of the things that's often overlooked or not apparent or doesn't seem to be of note in my mind with architecture is the context in which it's taking place in terms of time. Money is sort of beaten to a pulp into how significant that is to everybody, but it's actually not architecture. That's more a reflection of sort of collective will or priorities, and this is not by any means an ignorance to the reality of resource limitation, resource allocation and limitation. But if I were to say that one is primary, I would say it's time. Time in production, yes, time in the process, time in the choosing, on the owner or client side, and that's really what makes it the art that it is. So in a limitless time or money scenario, the basics are not really what the basics really are. In that you have this latitude to waste and play. I mean, great stuff. I hope, I hope anybody who's interested gets to play in that way. And in a way that's one of the things we get in a format of sitting and talking and just sort of rambling about architecture and the basics of architecture. You get this play space, and that's key. But in the actual practice, in the actual delivery, the reality of architecture being created, there's this like anything, by the way. I mean, of course, this is not like specifically architecture. It just shows up in a particular way here. There's this time limitation. Yes, there's also a resource limitation. Somebody who doesn't understand that aspect of it, you really can't understand what it really is, because what that means is, on the providing side, you have to get good at making choices and then producing along the lines of those choices. It sounds like obvious. It's easier said than done. It takes practice. It takes hard work. Talent, sure, but these things can be variously learned, But interestingly, on the owner and client side, something akin to that is required. And this is why there's a creative angst, a creative anxiety, creative fear, whatever you want to, what level of intensity you want to sort of ascribe to that. But it's almost not perceived as creative, but it is actually in a very real way. It's really where the rubber meets the road when one chooses not this, yes, that design. And that can bring up a lot of things. And that's part and parcel to the process of what architecture actually is. So yes, this is a basic. It's a basic. How do you teach this? How do you do this? Well, you try. But, you go for it. You go for it again and again. You seek to get better. You learn. You try things out. Now, when it's your one home and you're getting addition and renovations, where's the room for experimentation? Not so much. But it's like a decision making. Put the effort in the upfront in finding somebody on a professional level, if you will, or whether you're getting it from a friend or whatever. Try to find, or from books, and the internet and everything. Try to find the things prior that prime you for success. Where you can go, yes, I did my best. But there is an element of it of, ooh, we got to decide here. And there's an element of it that's, in that sense, likely to feel imperfect every time. So in that way, as permanent and fixed as architecture can sort of appear to be in its end result, that's one of its sort of, pillars of what it is this permanence, often the way it's thought of in the industrialized, civilized, context, etc. Structure, there's a permanence there, but this is kind of the reverse of that, is seeing that there's this, imperfect, time-limited, resource-limited, yes, process within which it happens that calls on very personal things to be successful, besides the skill. The main one that I would say is not that, I'm good at making decisions, I'm not good at making decisions. The main one is an insight into the fact of the way this is. That's in my opinion, of course. So one can get better at it simply by getting, this is what happens. This is not unusual that this would feel stressful at this point, or I'd feel remorse because I chose option B instead of option A or option C. Okay, I really needed to stress that for a while. Now let's get a little bit more into some of the other basics in the way the process unfolds. A lot of it sounds like common sense because it's sensical, if you will. But if you haven't sort of tracked the process, if you haven't done it yourself before, if you haven't read up on it or whatever, you need to map it out. Even if upon mapping it out, it feels almost like you knew it already. That's why I guess they're called basics. Basics are oft overlooked or sped past one step or another, and there's always a cost for doing it, because they're not called basics because they're simple and to be left behind. In this case, they're called basics in that it's sort of like immutable, foundational, sort of the way it is. To make a silly metaphor, but in a way a useful one. It's like I'm going to, I want to cruise up these stairs, right? I'm going to do step 1, step 2, and step 8. Stupid, right? Well, architecture's like that too, in that it's like, start at the beginning, go through the middle, and to the end. But you actually have to do it, and that also takes a tenor, if you will, of character that in a sense is very patient, while at the same time is sort of riding that to the forefront of that wave of, limited time, limited resources, choose and choose well. And that's why it's an art, it really is. So, so the first thing is understanding, they go hand in hand. The first thing is understanding what you want, articulating what you want, expressing what you want, showing what you want in every way that you can. That's could be called the programming phase in architecture. It's the program for the project. Again, I'm describing all this loosely, but to get a good feel for it. Part and parcel to that is, what do you have? What's already there? Existing conditions or feasibility studies and things like this. But the key, the basic, is the program, meaning what do you want? And the skill here is actually communicating, learning how to communicate first with yourself, of sort of scanning, and again having that almost baby-like, childlike innocence in a sense, and non-judgmentalism, to allow oneself to say, I like that, and take the question out of it, like I like that, I do like that, because we're human beings. All of our choices, everything we've done has experiences. For the better for some, for the worse for others, and most of us are sort of a mix. And as silly as it is, what color do you want this wall? Actually, again, can be a minefield of anxiety and unknowns and wanting to get it right but being not sure. Now, for some people, they just go like, what the heck are you talking about? I know what I want this, that, and the other. That could seem like they're powerful. That could seem like they're smart. It could seem like they're clear. They may or may not be. They may or may not be. So the first part of the process is the conversation, first with yourself, you could say, then with those who you're with, say your spouse or your partner or your business partners, to a clarity and the conversation with the architect. So again, I keep going back to, the upfront work of find the right architect. Find the one who you're comfortable with and who you trust, because if you're not able to present what it is you really want as fully as possible, is it really reasonable to expect that even the best architect could deliver it, in maybe a fantasy, because they're like a mind reader. What do you want? Oh, make me something, right? And he comes back, how's this? And you go, oh my God, he figured me out, or she figured me out. That's not normally how it works. So if you want to hedge your bets towards a successful project, don't count on that. I want to find a mind-reading architect, right? And so this skill, this basic of articulating the program, what it is you really want, is key. Now, I'm spending an inordinate amount of time on sort of the precursor context. Admitted, yes, that's what I'm doing here, and I'm going to speed through the delivery process and some of the design aspects, because there's just so much out there on it already. There's so much out there on all of this, So this is just a particular, vein, rivulet in much greater flows of information, and so that's why I sort of want to focus on these things that I feel like are often not given their just due, and quite a cost. That they're not often given their just due, because again, it's the step 1 to 8. I mean, that happens in miniature, okay, throughout architectural projects, and it costs in outcomes in very subtle ways. Even if it's an intangible, like a stress, like not getting along with the project team or whatever. And not to say you have to get along with the project team, but again, you want to hedge your bets at every, unit, if you will, of action, unit of relationship. And that's a very architectural notion to sort of understand. While it's the whole, of course, the structure needs to line up, right? Otherwise the whole doesn't stand up.
This episode continues in part 2. Key life.